This is Goku's son, DBZ, and today is another game review. First, I thought I'd mention, I forgot a statistic last time when I talked about the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast was originally released in Japan in 1998 and sold 10.6 million copies. Today, I will be reviewing the Sega Saturn, which was originally released in Japan in 1994 and sold 9.5 million copies worldwide. So it didn't do quite bad, but when you consider statistically, other consoles, not so good. Now, this is it. The Sega Saturn. Which, of course, you can see the classic Saturn logo. And this console only had, if you can see it, only had two controllers. Of course, the Sega name. You had, of course, it was a pretty bulky system if you think about it, given the time frame. You had your classic plugins. You also had this little thing on the back, which you could open up, and in this place, you would put in things like, say, a Dreamcast. I mean, not Dreamcast, but you would put in things such as, for instance, a memory unit or something of that nature. And, of course, up here you have a cartridge thing. Partially, you had to buy a special cartridge device to plug in order to play import games because of the region lock you had. You had to buy a special cartridge to put inside in order to play games such as great games that were only available import on the Sega Saturn, only in Japan, such as X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Good games like that were exclusively imports. You had a lot of great games also on the Sega Saturn as well. You had games like the Panzer Dragoon series, 1 and 2, which were exclusive to Sega Saturn. Originally, of course, original Resident Evil was first released on the Sega Saturn, not on the PS1. Some people think it was, but it wasn't. It actually came out on here just a brief bit prior to the PS1 version, but Sony also launched in the US a little bit later than Sega Saturn did. Though both consoles came out in Japan in 1994, it wasn't released until 1995, of course, the PS1 or PSX rather. I've discovered this recently at a flea market, actually at a really good price. A lot of people don't realize the actual value of a Sega Saturn. It's only valuable to those who are collectors and who appreciate Sega products. And for instance, of course, you have the eject button, you have a reset button, and power button. And it's a really good console overall. Sadly, it only had a very short lifespan. This is a version 2 controller. Of course, your D-pad and your classic 6 buttons, plus your R1 and L1 buttons. And the controller, actually, personally, I like the version 2 controller best for the console. It really works really well, this version. I mean, the other version works good, but it was a little wide and a little bulky. Honestly, I much preferred the smaller design of this controller rather. I also liked the D-pad better on the second model. Honestly, it plays good, and basically, even though sadly you have to basically go online or you have to look out at a pawn shop to find a Sega Saturn game or Sega Saturn products, but it's basically the same way for the Dreamcast thing, more PSX, aka PS1, and also other greats like the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. It's just like that with a lot of the older consoles. That, or if you can find like a retro gaming store, like one that is in a nearby city close to here, that specializes. It carries some stuff from like PS3, 360, all the way back to Atari 2600. They actually have like an entire case of Atari 2600 games. Sega Genesis as well, N64, you name it. But I'll get ready to wrap this video up. But the Sega Saturn was actually a really interesting, really good console overall. It played well, and of course one of the things about it at its time was it was a really bulky system, as you saw when I held it up. It's a lot larger than the Dreamcast. Dreamcast was more compact, a little bit better quality plastic was also used in the making than the Sega Saturn. Really, people just, I guess, didn't really understand the Sega Saturn, and that's one of the things. And it was ahead of its time, to be honest, as well. I think the problem was some of the really good games on the Sega Saturn were never released in America, and you had to buy, of course, a special cartridge to play the import games. And that's one thing that did not go over well, of course, for Sega. Where Sony has never had region lock on any of their consoles. They are the only one, to my knowledge, that has not had region lock. But I hope you find any of this info at all interesting. And please give me suggestions on some games you would like to see me review. Right now, in the future, when I do a Sega Saturn game review, I will be reviewing Virtual Fighter Remix, which was the Virtual Fighter version, of course, for the Sega Saturn. It's really good game, of course. I mean, it was the first actual full 3D fighting game on console, and basically also in the arcades. But, as always, of course, this is Goku-san DBZ. My next vlog that I'm going to do on consoles will be on the PSX or PS1. So I hope you stay tuned for that vlog. And give me ideas for top 10 lists that I'll probably start doing again in the springtime. And right now, as I'm filming, this is Sunday, January 26th. And I will be going to see the Royal Rumble tonight. So I look forward to that. But as always, I hope all you out there in YouTube land all have a good upcoming week. And just be prepared for the cold weather we have the next few days. And until next time, YouTube land.